SecurePod.
SecurePod.
Welcome to SecurePod. In this episode, I spoke with a dear friend of mine, Pierre Noel, a cybersecurity veteran with nearly 4 decades of experience across global enterprises, governments, startups, and more. We covered what it really takes to build security culture inside complex organizations, not through top-down mandates, but listening, understanding internal dynamics, and working within the constraints of each environment. Pierre shares lessons from his time at Microsoft, Huawei, and advising startups, with a strong emphasis on psychology over technology. We also talk about the limitations of traditional awareness programs, the realities of working across different regions, and why most attempts to force change in security fail. This is a very fun conversation. I always enjoy chatting with Pierre, so let's get into it. So welcome, Pierre.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you. So I'm a Belgian guy, French-speaking originally, as you can hear with the accent. And as far as cybersecurity is concerned, I've been in that business for nearly 40 years. And I have done almost everything you could imagine, from being developing stuff, being a CISO, to being a startup CEO, being an investor, and all. I have worked for very large organizations, people like Microsoft. I was the chief security officer of Microsoft for Asia. I was the worldwide chief security and privacy officer for Huawei, the very well-known Chinese company. I am actually a CISO for a few startup companies, which is a much nicer environment, I must say, less politics, more fun.
I can only imagine. Well, thank you for that. That's a good grounding. And so the understanding of also working in dynamics where you have extremely large organizations, Microsoft, Huawei, obviously politics. Before the show, we were talking about geopolitics as well. And obviously that is a consideration in those large organizations. And then working with startups. So a very different setting, hopefully less pressure, or different pressure, maybe. Healthier pressure. There you go. There's obviously a challenge that makes you get out of bed, as long as it's not too daunting. So that's a good summary. Let's get into it. Basically, this podcast SecurePod is supported by SecureFlag. And what we do is work with developers and a whole range of practitioners in the SDLC, but also beyond that, we built a threat modeling tool called Threat Canvas, which automates threat modeling so that it can be perhaps much more easily placed in the hands of developers. So that's a bit of a summary. Interestingly, we don't generally talk too much about SecureFlag because we want to keep this podcast less of an infomercial and much more of a discussion on broad topics. But that's a bit about our background. And what we find is at a very, very high level, the companies and customers of ours that are performing extremely well and getting these tangible outcomes from having the training are those that are highly attuned to developing and maintaining an engaged community in terms of the security culture. And the difference between a customer who has that type of psychology that's then embedded within the organization versus those that not is absolutely the difference between very successful programs and sometimes programs which really need a lot of pushing to get off the ground. Hopefully that sets the stage for first topic, which is how do you build a security culture within an organization, whether it be small, whether it be large? What are the first considerations that someone like you coming in, let's say that you've taken the new CISO role in large company X, what are the things that you do? What are the steps?
The first one, close your mouth, listen, because I am a firm believer that we cannot bring revolution by trying to inject cybersecurity culture into an organization. Revolution doesn't work. There are few cultures where it might work, but by and large, most of the culture, and by culture I mean different countries, different ethnic cultures, it doesn't work. You cannot force a cybersecurity revolution. So the first thing to do is to listen and learn the culture of the organization, learn what matters to these people, to the workers and to the senior management, learn the lingo they are using as well. It's very important that you don't come with the terminology or taxonomy that is specific to the finance industry if you are trying to bring security into an industrial complex. It just doesn't work. So be careful, pay attention, listen, learn the culture, learn the fabric, learn the language that is being used, and try to assess the risks and the best way to communicate the reality of these risks inside the organization.
Mm-hmm.
It will not work to come and say, oh, the world is about to end and we absolutely have to deploy the best security possible because otherwise we will all die. And no, you just don't do that. What makes sense is to say, I have done a proper analysis. I have spoken to many people. I came with no preconceived idea. And here is my list of the priority rated risks that I believe we might be subject to. But this is me saying, what do you think? And so gradually, if you do a good job, the senior executives and the people in the know, people who are stakeholders in the organization will be able to feedback and start telling you, yes, this risk, you're probably right. I remember something like that happened, that risk less so, and so and so and so. And then we start building a modus vivendi. We start speaking the same language. And so it's not me coming with my interpretation of how security should be and how big it should be. It's a gradual understanding. And so I get buy-in. And once I get buy-in, once people understand that I'm not here to create a revolution, now we can start deploying culture and doing that level by level. Again, not a revolution. You've got to identify which places are best to start, be it from a technology, from a policy, or from a department point of view. But do that gradually. Don't force it. Don't force it.
Very much like diagnostics. Let's say you're on a new assignment. How much prep work? Obviously, you have a wealth of knowledge to draw from, but how much prep work would you be doing on that industry sector to actually at least get a familiarity with the terminology that you will inevitably end up being immersed in for a time during that engagement? And B, how much understanding do you want to have about the incidents from the outside perspective versus getting maybe this slightly different version from the inside so as not to have any bias in your opinions?
Well, as much as humanly possible. That is, before I start the engagement, I will have to learn about the industry, about the specifics of the industry, if I don't know that industry yet. And I will do that. And that's another strength that I recommend everyone to have. I will do that by tapping on my network, people I trust.
Yep.
Finding people who have a good understanding in this kind of industry or in this country. Industry is one thing, country is another one, or multiple countries for that matter. You have to equip yourself, but that is information that you will use. But once you open the door of the company, then you don't claim to have an understanding. You start listening again, and then they will give you another perspective, which is exactly as you said, that's a perspective of the company as opposed to an external perspective. And then you blend both. It takes time. It's not something that you have to rush. Depends on the size of the organization and whatnot. If I am to help a startup or 200 people, 1,000 people company in one country, probably after a month, I would have a pretty good understanding and I'm really ready to start providing value. Whereby if we are talking about international organizations such as Huawei, for example, 6 months is not enough because I would have to understand all the segments, all the countries, all the different levels of industry and concerns they might have. But the first thing is I am religious about that. I equip myself with as much understanding as I can. I open the door of that company and I listen. I don't speak.
I really, really enjoy that. And also the fact that you're talking a different language if you're going into a different sector. Discussions about cyber and finance are completely different to discussions in cyber about manufacture, like, I don't know, Schneider Electric. Let's just take one name out of a million. And also the cultures as well, the ethnic cultures.
I spend a lot of time in Asia, probably 25 years in Asia. And of course, every country in Asia is different, has got a different culture. People might look the same, but Taiwan, mainland China, totally different. Hong Kong, mainland China, totally different. Singapore, Malaysia, and so on and so on and so on. And so you realize that culture of the country, the people, has a significant impact in the way you will succeed in deploying proper cybersecurity culture. I have done things in countries in Asia for government to ensure the government people, the civil servant would behave properly, that if I were to attempt doing the same in Europe, there would be riots. They would go on strike, whereby in this country in Asia, that was perfectly the right thing to do. And again, we've got to be attuned to that. Behind every cybersecurity problem, there is a human being. Building proper cybersecurity is more psychology than technology. It has to map the way people behave, or we have to make sure that they change a little bit, but it has to be within the boundaries of what they consider tolerable, acceptable to them. And that's very subtle. And again, the ethnic culture plays a big role into that one. It's fascinating.
It is. I relate to those points. My time in Cambodia were very informative, Bangladesh and Guatemala. But when someone hasn't visited a region, it's very easy to clump it and say Southeast Asia. The level of the difference between Cambodia and its neighboring countries, Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos, and also Singapore, it is just another world. So
Exactly.
obviously it's a region, and I guess the same applies, being in Europe, the difference between,
Europe
say,
is the same.
Yeah.
Italy, France, Germany, Netherlands, completely different. Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a great segue to look at a complex scenario like, say, Europe, because I know that you work with a couple of startups based in Europe. Again, broadly, and this is interesting, there's a guest that I'll be having on next week, and then that recording will be released in several months' time as well. He works for ENISA, and he works on capacity building throughout different European countries. Maybe you can give a couple of examples, maybe anecdotal examples of interesting friction that you've experienced and also how you've resolved that. A large organization where you do have potential conflicts or friction in terms of, say, policy agendas and maybe the cultural differences as well in getting your message across. And I'm also thinking in part, because I know that you do some advisory work with SoSafe, which is an awareness company as well, the messaging must be different amongst these different countries, but also then just to tap that on slightly, an adjacent point would be how you go about working on policy issues as well, or policy friction within a block like that, and also thinking global as well.
Fascinating question. There's one question that you have to ask before you start deploying anything. You have to understand whether the conglomerate you are working with is a unified conglomerate, that is a pyramid, or whether it's a federated conglomerate. I can take the example of a huge conglomerate that has headquarters in Hong Kong. So it's not European. In fact, they've got plenty of activities in Europe as well. That one was a sovereign conglomerate. That is, on top, you had one person, and that person had appointed a team of people, and everything would be following what this team of people decide. So in that case, it's a pyramidal approach. It's easy, tone from the top, and poof, everyone
And
will
then
have
it trickles here. Yeah.
Yes, it's a dictatorship. You don't have a choice. You have to follow. And you don't come and tell me you are different, because it's the culture of the organization. You seldom encounter that. What you encounter is a federated environment where, yes, you've got a conglomerate at the top, but most of the entities are left to operate more or less as they see fit within some boundaries, as long as you generate 20% profit and as long as you don't create any strike, I'll leave you alone, this kind of approach. And for this one, you cannot come with a dictatorial approach. You cannot come with a one size fits them all. And instead, what I usually do from a cultural and from a policy point of view, you set up a baseline. Baseline is, okay, this is what the company stands for. This is what the conglomerate stands for. So we will make sure that this baseline is accepted in every entity. A typical element of that baseline would be data classification. And I hate the term data classification because usually people think when I say data classification, people think, oh yes, private, confidential, secret, top secret. That stuff doesn't work. That's not what data classification is. That just doesn't work. But having a proper way to communicate the risk associated with the information. So that risk must follow the information, and that must be done in a way that is meaningful. So if you're working into a conglomerate or an international company, you want to make sure that if a document is considered high business impact in Egypt, the same document that is being sent to an employee of the same company in Lebanon or in Singapore would continue to carry the same labeling, and people would understand how to behave with that one. So this is one of the baseline. But then in this kind of federated environment, you have to leave it to local people, a local CISO, for example, to incarnate things the way he or she sees fit. Perhaps he or she might decide to use some specific technologies that might not be the same technologies elsewhere, or the education process might be different. So you have to determine what is the battle that you want to have on the baseline, and you have to let people implement according to their own culture, because you cannot, being a global CISO of a large organization, you cannot pretend that you have an understanding in everything that's happening into every country. Delegate with people you trust. That's the way I usually work. Again, initially it depends on understanding the company. Is it a dictatorship? Is it a federation?
Yeah, I think coming into a different region and assuming that you know all the idiosyncrasies would be the ultimate hubris and a recipe for downfalls. You're doing the opposite of that. I think that's incredible.
We usually say at Microsoft, assume breach, always work on the assumption that there will be a breach. That's the Microsoft mantra. I would say equally, assume cluelessness. I'm clueless. So I have to work on the assumption that when I go to Brazil, I know nothing about Brazil. I know nothing about the division of my company in Brazil, and that's the same in Singapore, the same in Belgium. I'm a Belgian guy. I have no clue on how people should behave in Belgium anymore because I have left Belgium so long ago. But
Yeah, I've got no idea about Australia these days. I was just thinking when you were mentioning that with SecureFly, we have a couple of customers and some of the standouts, they are this beautiful, interesting mix of both cultural, different countries, but also cultural in terms of the sector that they're operating in. So we work with one of the largest banks in Singapore. They have a very rigid, compliance-driven, highly successful uptake of training, I guess in part because of that rigidity within the sector that they operate in, but also partly because that is kind of embedded in the country culture as well. The expectation of doing this doctrine on time or before time as part of your process. Now, that is in contrast to another extremely successful program, which there's a relation here with Microsoft, but it's a very large software gaming company. There's several different companies. One is in Europe, a couple in the United States and other places. Completely different cases. In that one, it's more federated. It's more of a voluntary type of program, but it's still incredibly successful. And then reframing that to say, okay, well, let's put it more of a competitive edge as opposed to the, compliance angle. But both of them are running extremely successfully. And when I say these programs, what I mean from Secure Flag standpoint is, training labs and then measuring the output and improvement in secure coding capacities in essence. But two very, very different things. Now, what our customer success team has to do is understand these dynamics early on and then listen, as you're saying. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from this podcast. And I might put the title on it, which is just listen. It's a good title. We're heading to the end. I mean, it's funny with these things. I generally sort of reserve about 25 to 30 minutes, and we're already at the 20 odd minute mark. I wanted to ask more specifically about your work with SoSafe and security awareness programs. And a lot of the points that you've described, really, they sit in the general category of building awareness, but maybe a bit, whether it's specifically about SoSafe or building that awareness, maybe not to the executives, which is something you were saying, listen, understand the terminology, the lexicon, whatever policy changes might need to occur, whatever technological actions might need to occur. But what about the work in security awareness? Now, this is not so much developer training, but this is more the general population. How do you get to engage the non-technical practitioners in enhancing their understanding and ability to counter any potential threats?
Fascinating question, and that goes straight into why I fell in love with the people at SoSafe. Is let's change topic. Let's say that you have an addiction, and I have to help you to get out of that addiction. Probably I will succeed if I am a psychologist or if I have been trained, and I know the little thing that will motivate you to changing. I cannot force feed you. I cannot tell you you have to change. That's unbearable. No, you have tricks to help someone. And I use addiction, I could have someone to learn something. It doesn't matter.
It's pretty apt though, if you say to a very staunch alcoholic, mate, stop drinking, and I never thought of that before. That's great advice. I'll stop.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. That's why the SoSafe people are attracted. When I met up with the CEO of SoSafe, Niklas, he told me, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a techie. I am not a cybersecurity person. I'm a psychologist. And I thought, yes, of course, that's it. Because most of the organizations offering cybersecurity awareness and things like that, they come from a technical angle. And they do believe that everything in cyber relies on technology. Therefore, technology should drive the way I will try to make you evolve. That's completely wrong. You're dealing with human. So if you're dealing with human, you have to use psychology, not technology. And that's that shift that really super interested me when I met up with the SoSafe people. And I have used that, and I'm using them wherever I can. So for all the organizations that I advise or work as a CISO, I try, if it's possible, to have people like SoSafe. I don't want to just make an advertisement for SoSafe because I'm pretty sure some other organizations are going the same direction. Embed what you do on psychology. Don't embed it on technology, please. You are dealing with human being. You are not dealing with a computer. So if you want to have the human being evolve, you have to understand the right stick, the right carrot, which again might differ from country to country, from culture to culture. It became obvious, for example, 15 years ago, when we spoke about cybersecurity training, we spoke about once a year, you will have to attend a 5 hours training where people will tell you the right from the wrong. But then the psychology tells me that in reality, a human being only has 7 things that are front-minded and the rest is in the back. And so after you attend such a training, yes, perhaps for a few days, security is something that will remain in your front. Yeah, I have to worry about security. But after 1 month, it gradually goes into the back and you forget about it. So that does not work. And again, I'm not a psychologist or anything. They have the trick. They know what to do so that people are continuously motivated or continuously remember that they have to apply some cybersecurity decision or risk-based decision whenever they are confronted with a potential situation. And yeah, it's dealing with a human being. I'm repeating myself. That's really what makes the difference between a successful awareness, be it with developers or be it with normal users, but the difference between awareness, a successful one, and a non-successful one.
Really enjoyed that. I will post links to the different organizations and things we chatted about in the show notes. Pierre, absolute pleasure as always, my friend, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere in the world sometime soon.
Looking forward to it, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
SecurePod. SecurePod.